What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over a main menu for our Super Smash Brothers and Platform Fighter template. So this is going to be a very basic main menu. I'm going to be able to go between two buttons on the screen with either the keyboard or with the mouse, or both if I really want to, although it gets a little weird with that. And we'll be able to click into our game as usual, and from there everything will run. Now the main menu itself is going to be pretty simple. It's just going to be essentially this widget that has some data on it, you know, buttons, images, background, and we're going to go from there to build our entire game. We'll have a lot of episodes with menus and things because a lot of the times in games like this and platform fighters, the menus are a little bit more advanced, they're a little bit more specialized, and so I'm going to try and take on that sort of approach as well and give us all the functionality we could ever want, including custom input controls and using controllers. But before we get started, if you want to get caught up and see everything we've done in the series, I believe this is episode 34. We've done quite a bit. We've come very far, but we still have much farther to go. But we're getting there one episode at a time. So if you want to get caught up, I'll leave the playlist right here. That'll list all current episodes and all future episodes of the series. I'll also link this episode right here in the top right corner to the character select when we created that, because it is the specialized Super Smash Brothers platform fighter character select, where we have the ability to pick up a coin, drop it on a certain location, and then select that character. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create a widget that we can actually put as our main menu. You don't have to make it look super fancy yet, but we'll get something in there. That way we can actually test all of our functionality. So if we go to where we want to create our widget, hit add new, user interface, widget blueprint, it'll make one. I put mine in here. I called it main menu. As soon as you open it up, you'll have a blank canvas here, just like you do with all other widgets, and then we're going to fill this stuff in. But before you go any farther, let's go ahead and make sure we don't forget to open the level blueprint on our main menu level and change the character select screen was previously up. Make sure you set that to be the main menu now. That way, as soon as we load into this level, we spawn the main menu widget. And that's what we want to do because we want to be able to test all the logic we're going to be doing today. So today, really what we're covering, we're going to cover two different modes of input on our widget and navigating the main menu itself. So we're going to be looking at Unreal's focus system. I didn't really use this in the fighting game tutorial if you've watched that because of the way I plan on setting up the menus in that game. The focus system it can be a little bit strange, but it would work well for a game like this and the way I expect these menus to be set up. So we're going to be covering that a little bit. I'm also going to give you a little example of how you can write your own custom input so you can decide what logic you want to happen when you press certain keys on a keyboard or, of course, a controller. So we'll be going over both of those and also just making a nice, enticing main menu screen. I know this isn't exactly the perfect example of that right now, but I can show you some tips and tricks that are going to be useful when you're making your own. So let me actually show you how I set this one up so you can get an idea of what's going on. We had this canvas panel in here by default. You usually will when you create a widget. I've added a background image, which is literally just an image that I brought onto the canvas panel. Then I anchored it by clicking this guy right here in the bottom right, and that will take up the entire canvas, basically the entire parent container. Now, if it's offset at all, left, top, right, or bottom, it will be literally offset. So like the default for this makes it look like that. Well, we don't want that. I want it to be covering the entire canvas. So I set everything to 0. That way we have a full background image. Now right now, I left it as the default, which is the color white. You can change the color if you'd like and change the color of your background. But really, what we're probably going to be doing is adding an image or some sort of render here so we can display something to the players as opposed to just a color in the background. Feel free to put in a placeholder image for now. I will be in the near future. And you can leave it a variable if you want. You probably don't need to ever edit the background in this case, but you may want to apply effects on it or have some animations, in which case you could trigger them depending on what's going on in the main menu or in the menu systems. If you have a hierarchy of menus, such as like I'm going into my battle button and then I have to choose if I want like story or arcade or whatever, you could do some things with the background to change its color or, whatever. So it could be useful. Then really the only other thing we have to add right now is add 2 buttons, or add as many buttons as you want, but I recommend at least 2 buttons for now, so that way we can test our navigation logic, and then it's very, very simple to add more in the future. But you can't really test it with just 1, you do need to be able to see it with 2. So I put in a battle and an options. We don't have options yet, but I put it in there. But battle is what's going to start our game. So add 2 buttons. I called one battle BTN for battle button and the other one options BTN for options button. I've also brought the text field to be a child of the button. You just drag it onto your button directly and it'll let you do it. I already have a child on each one, so it won't let me do it again, but it's that simple. On the button itself, I just made the sizes. I didn't actually anchor it anywhere. And then for the style, I had made 2 images that I imported into the game. Red button and red button hover. So this is what it looks like when it's hovered or like selected right now. And this is what it looks like when it's not. So you can see when I hover over it, it gets smaller and a little bit darker. And the same happens to the battle button. If I switch off the options, you can see it's bigger right now. But when I hover over it, it gets smaller and darker. So, yep, you're selecting this one. Okay, so I just added 2 images to the game, and I've used them here for the style. For normal and hovered. You can easily do one for pressed as well, and you probably should. Okay, simple enough. Just put those guys in there. I didn't actually change anything else. So play around with that as needed. I'm not going to go into everything I did because I specifically made these images for this template. And I just kind of did whatever with them to make them look decent. But if you do want my settings for any reason, here you go. You can see everything that I have. For the text, I just added the text to the buttons like I said. I wrote in the content text here for battle and options. And then I changed the appearance section with the font and the color and opacity to make it bigger and to give it an outline. That way it looks a little bit nicer. Give it more outline if you want. But yeah, so it's that simple for the design view. We're going to go into the graph, and there's 3 things we're going to do today. Again, they're all going to be pretty easy, but this is going to be able to set you up for any other future buttons you want to add. Like with the fighting game, I want to get you set up because everyone's menu is probably going to be different to some extent, and there's no real right way to make it. So there's a lot of different things we can do here to customize it. When you come in the first time, you'll have 3 events. It'll be like the pre-construct, the construct, and the tick. You can get rid of those all if you want and just add the ones in that you need. You can keep the construct because we will be using that today. And then I'm also going to perform logic when we press the battle button. So let's start with the press battle button, just so if you run into any issues in this series, you can still play your game easily by clicking the battle button. I don't want you being stuck, not being able to use your main menu at all, just because you ran into some bugs. So simply click on the battle button, scroll all the way down on the details panel on the right, and click the plus next to on pressed. And when you do that, it will create this event right here. When this event gets created, what I want to do is basically the same thing we were doing in the level blueprint, but this time we're going to create the character select screen widget and we're going to add it to the viewport. Okay, so once you do this, then the character select screen will pop up. Now, take note that if you don't have a background image on those widgets, like for example the character select screen widget, I had a background image, but the render opacity was set to be, it was either all set to be 0, like the alpha 2, or the render opacity here in the behavior was set to be 0. And so I actually added a transparent background. Now it didn't matter because there was no light source in the main menu scene, so it was black anyway. But now that we're going to be covering up the main menu with this widget, we want to make sure that we get that right. So make sure that your background image is also anchored like this, and make sure it's visible and it does whatever it is you need it to do. If you need it to be an image, if you need it to be a render, something so that you see something cool and it covers up the main menu. And then make sure you do the same for the stage select as well. Make that guy anchored. Change the render opacity, color, image, whatever. Okay, and that's simple enough. And at that point, you're already back to where you were. You have this new main menu widget in here now, but you can actually still just press the battle button and get back to where everything else was. So that's a very simple test. Once you do that, then what we have to consider is navigating the main menu. I'm going to essentially show you two forms of input here. It's all going to work together. So it's not like I'm separating the logic and here's one and here's the other, but I'm going to actually integrate them together. So feel free to play around with this and get a feel that you want and you enjoy for your game. But I'm actually going to use their focus system to an extent. I'm going to use their focus system mainly for now, just so that we can play around with our, what button is being focused and what button is being pressed when we press something like the enter key. When we get into controllers, it's going to have to adjust quite a bit anyway. It would still technically work, but not exactly the way that it works on the keyboard. So we're going to have to adjust a few things anyway. At that point, we will probably change to a more sophisticated menu system. But I always like to learn everything I can and help share that knowledge with you guys. So if there's anything you can learn from using the focus method that Unreal has or writing your own, then I'm happy to share it. So anyway, what I've done is I've basically taken the battle button and the options button are variables. And that means I can grab them in the graph. So I literally just drag the battle button in, get it, and call set focus on it as soon as we get into event construct here. Whoops. Okay, and the reason for this is because event construct of the main menu, this is basically when the main menu gets created and everything gets filled out and defined initially. Well, when that happens, we want to focus whatever button it is that we want to start with. So basically, I just focus this button right away as soon as we hit the construct. That way that button is ready to go, and the player knows that that button is focused at the start. That's the button they're currently on. And then I'm calling this move selection function that we're going to write in a second. Let me explain what I'm doing with this first, and then we'll write it. So move selection is something we're going to write here that's going to determine what button we need to navigate to next. Now, in the fighting game, this was more linear. It was like we have a direction, and we're just going to say, oh, these are the indices of the buttons, and we're going to define which one we should set, which one we should use. We're doing a similar method here, but what's different about this one is this menu is going to be a little bit less uniform. It's going to be a little more wacky, because we're going to have, like, say, 2 buttons on the left-hand side, and we're going to have, like, 6 buttons on the right, because the sizes could be different of these buttons. If you look at a menu like Smash Bros, then the button sizes are different. So I know, like, I'm trying to think, picture it in my head, but I know there's, like, the Smash button over here. I think there's, like, trophies, like, character stats, all your stuff over here on the right, and you have a lot more buttons. So that sort of like uniform linear method wouldn't work as well, but we can still write our own navigation system to make it work and be convenient for both keyboard and controller. So that's what we're going for, and that's why we're going to write our own move selection function here. So let's go ahead and actually do this. Let's write the functions, and then we'll talk more about the reasoning for doing things like listen for input action here and what they mean. So I only made 2 new functions today. I made move selection and set focus to menu item. We'll start with move selection. So just click plus function and go into it. When you're in here, you can rename it if you haven't already. And you can also scroll down, look at your input section, hit plus to add a new input parameter, and we're going to add a new variable with type integer, and I call it direction. Really what I'm trying to do is figure out what index I want to move to. So if we are on index 0, which would be the battle button, and I pressed right, we want to move to the options button. Logically, that's what we want to do. So what I'm going to do is when we press right, this is 1 apart. This is index 0, this is index 1. So if I move right and I add 1 to the index, then we'll be on the options button. So it makes sense logically, and we can set that up in the code and in the blueprint very easily, actually. Okay, so we have this direction, and we're going to pass it in, depending on what the player presses. And then we are going to determine a few things to know what button we're really on. So the first thing I want to make sure of is that the selection we're on updates to the new selection we should be on. But the other thing we need to know is make sure that we're going to a valid selection. So if I press right and I end up on the options button, what happens if I press right again? I don't want to like go off to this random button that doesn't exist on the other side of the screen and not be able to select anything. I should either not do anything and just stay on the options button, or I should loop around to the I should wrap around to the first index here, the battle button. Okay, so let's look at this, and let's make 2 variables to make this happen. We need a current selection and the number of max selections. So I've made 2 variables, both integers, current selections, max selections. In this case, I only have 2 buttons, so it's very simple. I have current selection of 0, current selection of 1, and max selections I actually put as 1 because I'm saying 0 and 1. So don't be confused by that. I know you're thinking, oh, there's 2 selections though, and you're totally right. But I'm thinking max selections like highest possible selection index, which is 1. Something to note here is that we only have 2 buttons now, but you could have like several buttons on the side. Like I said, you could have kind of rows and columns. Like I could have 2 rows, but I could have 6 columns. That changes the indices of the buttons as well. So we'll get into that. Don't worry. But just keep that in mind. If you're going to go ahead and make your menus like that, keep in mind, try and think about the logic that would be required to handle that sort of thing. Okay? So current selection by default should be 0 when you make it. However, max selections should be the highest index that you can achieve before you want to wrap around or get stuck on that last element. Alright, I'm always going to assume 0 is the lowest selection, and max selections can update with the number of buttons we have. And now the logic here is basically just trying to get us to the proper selection. So we take our direction, which is going to be -1 for left and 1 for right, and we add that to our current selection. So again, current selection 0 would be the battle button. So if we move right and we want to go to the options, then we're taking 1 plus current selection, which is 0, which would be 1. 0 plus 1 is 1. Okay, so this value right here is 1. Then we want to make sure that this is not greater than max selections, because if it is, we'll have to wrap around, right? So if this is not greater than it, meaning it is less than or equal to max selections, then we want to be able to update it to the proper location. Okay? So if we do this together, I'll write it down below so you can see it. Int plus int. You drag in current selection. You take this, the return node, and say less than or equal to. Make sure that this result is less than or equal to max selections. Drag off of this guy to go into a branch. Okay? That's what we've done until here. Now this is where it starts, separating based on what result we get here. If this is true, current selection is less than or equal to max selections, that means we can simply update it to that current selection, meaning 0 plus 1 goes to the options button, right? And if I press left, which is going to be passing in -1, if we're on index 1, going to index 0 is as easy as 1 minus 1, or 1 plus -1, which is 0. Right? But we want to make sure that the player also can't go below the lowest number. They can't go below 0. So with that, if we're on 0 and we go left, which is -1, we don't want to go to -1 because we don't have a button with index -1. Because of that, we want to either wrap around and go to 1, or we want to stay at 0. I like the wrap method, so I'm using wrap for both. Okay? So, if it's true that current selection plus a direction is less than or equal to max selections, that means we can move there. At least it's not greater than the highest selection possible. So then we also have to check something else. You see, this is still the return value from the addition. And I bring it into this. And I check and make sure it's greater than or equal to 0. Basically meaning that it is going to be greater than -1. Okay? So, if this result is both less than max selections, less than or equal to max selections, but greater than or equal to 0, we know it's within the valid range of indices that exists for our buttons. So we can flat out move to it. So the last thing we need to use this for, you can see there's another reroute node, is I just set current selection equal to it, if it's true. All right. One more time. So if we press right and we're on battle, we want to go to options. That is a valid move, so we could do that. Pressing right when we're on options is not valid. It won't go to another button. We'll have to wrap around. Okay? Pressing left when we're on options to go to battle is valid. Pressing left on battle is not valid. There's no button over here, so we're going to have to wrap around. So those cases where we have to wrap are the false conditions in these branches. All right? So let's check that out. If current selection plus the direction is less than or equal to max selections, returns false, meaning that current selection plus direction is greater than max selections, we want to wrap around to the first index, which is index 0 in this case. That's our lowest possible index, so that's where we're going to start. Okay? Now let's look at it the other way around. Let's say that current selection plus direction is less than or equal to max selections. However, it is less than 0. If it's less than 0, then it's going to go into this false. And we want to set current selection to max selections because we're going below the minimum value, so we want to wrap around to be the highest value. So set current selection to max selections. Regardless of what route we go, where we either have the value that got updated and did not have to wrap, the value that got updated to wrap to the lowest possible index, and the value that got updated to wrap to the highest possible index. All three of them, you can see I use reroute nodes to link here, go into the set focus to menu item function. We haven't made that function yet, so let's do that now. Plus function, set focus to menu item. And this is our function here. What this is going to do is set the focus and the style for our buttons to know what item we're hovering over or we're selecting with the keyboard currently. That way we know what the player is currently choosing and they get some feedback. Okay, So in here, do the same thing that you did with move selection. Make sure you add another input parameter that is an integer. I call this index to focus because we're passing in the current selection here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this parameter into a switch on int. If you just type switch, it'll come up right away. And I'm going to add a pin so it's not just 0 in default. Make sure it's 0, 1 in default to start, or really however many buttons you're going to have. So 0 is the battle button, 1 is the options button. Default, I'm bringing to the battle button as well, just to be safe, but it's not required. There shouldn't really ever hit a default case. Then we're going to do the same thing for each button. And we're going to hard code this a little bit more right now because we only have 2. But when we get into more advanced menus, I'll show you how to write a function for this. This is a little bit more convenient for, larger scopes and more menus. But what I'd like to do is take the button. If we're on index 0 here, and that's the index, the current selection index, then I want to focus that button. So I'm going to grab battle button, set focus, and that's simple enough. But you can say I also do something else here. I actually drag off battle button, type get style. Style is referring to the style of the button. So when you're under appearance here in the design view, you have style. And then that's where I can change the look of my button. In here, I set up normal and hover so that when I hover over, it changes. But if I was to just go back and forth with my own controls, it wouldn't trigger the hover behavior here. We need to set the style since we're doing our custom input system here. So I take my style, and what I do is I call set members in button style. You'll get something that looks like this. What you can do now is click on this. You'll have somewhere either over here or on the right, you'll see that these options pop up and you can select which ones you want to be able to trigger. So I want to be able to edit just the normal in this case. And once I do that, I'll get this node popping up. Normal is basically how this button looks when it's not being hovered or pressed. Pressed will be important in the future. Hovered's really only important for mouse. It doesn't auto trigger when focusing it. So if you don't plan on using mouse, it's not required. But I just care about normal. I'm going to right click on it and split the struct pin. Once you do that, you get what I have here. And then you can set the data that you care about in it. And I care about the normal image. The rest can be drawn as, they can be drawn regularly because I haven't changed any of these variables anyway. So all I care about is the normal image. It'll start out as none. All you have to do is find your hover image and put that guy in. And this is what's going to be hard coded. Basically, I'm clearing the other button. That way it goes back to its default state. So the same thing we just did here, but with the other button. So instead of battle button, I grab options button, I get the style, I set members in it, and I set the image to the non-hovered, to the standard version of the button. So when I select the battle button, when I hover over it with my personal navigation, you can see the options button gets bigger again because it's going back to this new style right here, the standard style. Alternatively, if we go into set focus the menu item and we pass in an index of 1, meaning we're on the options button, we want to do the exact opposite of this. We want to grab the options button, set the focus, get the style of it, and set members in button style. Then we want to set the normal image to be the hovered gray button or the hovered options button. After that, we're going to take our battle button, get the style, set the members in it, and set it to our standard battle button, not our hovered one. Okay, and that's how we get our buttons to actually change depending on what selection we have. They also work with the mouse, as I mentioned. Okay, so you have two methods here, both working. I can click it or I can press any of the confirmation keys such as enter. Those are the default confirmation keys. And if I press that, then I automatically go to my character select. Now, let's go back to our event construct and our event graph. We had set focus, and I said this move selection was being passed in here, or was being called here. And it is. So now you can call your move selection here. This is because move selection is calling set focus the menu. And so I just passed in 0, that way it wouldn't update at all, and it would call set focus the menu. You could use this if you had multiple places that the main menu could start. Like you might want to change what it starts on. If you always want to start it on the same button, like I always want to start it on battle, you can just call set focus the main menu and pass in your current selection. It's up to you how you want to do that. Just giving you a little bit of freedom there. There you go. And you'll see you get the same thing. Perfect. So now all we have to do is trigger our logic to be able to switch between the left and the right buttons when we press a specific key. Because by default, you will have some navigation when you set focus by using the mouse keys. I guess if you're not, if you don't click into the window, you can actually select these buttons just like this. You can see this little dotted line shows up. And you can select these buttons using Unreal's navigation, and it works, and it's fine. But if you do that, you have to use the arrow keys, or you have to manually change what keys you're going to do. What I prefer to do is allow it to be different based on, either what the player chose, or based on different controls, because some controls have things that won't function on certain devices. For example, the D input controllers, such as the PlayStation controllers, don't actually work in Unreal by default, at least not with a lot of the regular navigation and movement and control settings. So to get it to be recognized, there's other things you can do. Long story short, by giving ourselves the ability to set up our own custom navigation, we can fix a lot of this up. So what we're going to do now is figure out when we want to call move selection for left and right. I'm going to go into Edit Project Settings, go to Input, Action Mappings. I'm going to add menu right and menu left. We already had a menu grab coin if you've been following the series. This is for the grabbing the coin for the character select screen and the stage select screen. The inputs for that for keyboard and controller. I'm doing menu right and menu left here just for the keyboard for now. So I've added 2 more by clicking the plus 2 times. Called it menu right, menu left, and then I changed the key to whatever. I changed it to A and D because that's what I'm comfortable with, but that could always be adjusted later. Then I want to make sure I copy this name or just keep note of exactly, I don't know why my C key got stuck there, but I want to copy this name or keep track of exactly what this name is. Then I want to listen for input action for both of these. Okay, just like this. And then in the action name, you have to put the exact name. Menu left. Capitalization does matter, I believe, in this case. And then you'll want to do one for menu right. You don't have to change anything else on here, but you have this callback section that'll be empty. You can drag off that, type add custom event, and then rename these events. Rename it move left and move right, or whatever, left, right, doesn't matter. This is just for you. But essentially what we're doing is if this action mapping was pressed, then we're going to call this event. So when I press left, we're going to call move left event. When I press right, we're going to call the move right event. And with that, then we can call our move selection to move between the entries. So you just call move selection for move left, move selection for move right, and you change the direction. Move left is a direction of -1. Move right is a direction of +1. Anyway, guys, that's all I got for you, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed and this helped you make your main menu, then please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel. Anything else you can do, and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for 5,000 subscribers. I really, really am so grateful for that. You can't even believe it. Thank you so much. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys for everything, for going the extra mile to show me some support. I'm really glad you're enjoying the series. If you had any issues with this series or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It's completely free. I'd be happy to help you out with any problems you had. And that's all I got, guys. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Goodbye.